Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Phantom of the Rubens, and today we're having India Phillips with us, who's a managing director of a Bonhams auction house. Prior to that, she was a head of Impressionist and Modern Art department in Bonhams, and she led some of the biggest sales for this department, like the Dali and the Magritte sale. Prior to that, India also worked in Sotheby's and Christie's. Hello, India.
Hi, Daria. It's lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too, and thank you very much for agreeing to do this.
Not at all. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you. You have such an amazing career, and I wanted to ask you more about it. How did you reach such a glory? You're a managing director at Bonhams Auction House.
It's been a long journey, and it's obviously a role that I enjoy enormously, but I've had quite a varied career in the auction world, not just in management positions, but as you say, in a specialist department. So I really started there, learning about the category that I was really interested in, cataloguing, contacting experts, becoming head of sales, so looking after the process of the auction itself, and then kind of onwards and upwards.
And when did you realize that you want to be an art historian?
I think I was always very interested in art, always responded really well to it from when I was a very young child, but much more on the kind of practicing. So I love drawing, love painting. I think for a long time I felt that that was probably where I wanted to kind of go after school, was probably to art college. And then during that kind of process of studying and practicing myself, I worked on a number of projects where I was kind of learning more about the history of certain artists or architects. And I realized that actually that was the part that I enjoyed even more than the practicing, was the research and learning and understanding artists and creators who'd kind of worked before. So I think before I left school, I was pretty kind of set on the idea of doing something in the art world, probably more on the academic side. And it was only kind of later after studying that I realized the commercial world was something that I could go into as a career.
And was there any type of a moment when you realized that this is the moment I want to go to the auction house, like while you were studying? Or
Yeah, I think I always found the commercial art world fascinating. I remember as a child seeing a Colnaghi catalogue with a price list in the back, these kind of old 90s, catalogues with old master drawings. And I thought, oh my God, so incredible, the idea that you can own these drawings that would otherwise, in my experience, have been seen in museums. So I think from that moment on, I thought, wow, this is something that could be really interesting. Imagine having a career that allowed you to handle artworks every day, but also have the fun and the excitement of the buying and selling. So I think that was probably dealing with those kind of catalogues, reading them as a kind of young adult, as a teenager, was probably that moment.
And as I remember, your father is also an art historian. Did he play a certain role in the choice of your career?
It's an interesting one to think about, because obviously I think the main thing is being in an environment when I was growing up where there were a lot of books, not just about art history, but about history, printmaking. He's an English literature professor, but with a focus on William Blake, who obviously was an incredible printmaker, and there was a big focus on his practice. So I think being surrounded by lots and lots of books makes you curious. Well, it made me curious as a child, and I wanted to see what was in the books. A lot of them were art history texts and monographs, so kind of being surrounded by pictures. And, we lived in an apartment that had a lot of prints on the wall and paintings. So I think just rather than it necessarily being something that my father wanted me to go into, I don't think that was the case at all. I think he was very relaxed about what I did as a career. But I think the environment it really helps you become familiar with aesthetics and art history and that kind of thing.
Of course, of course. And if you were not in the commercial world, if you were in museum or in academia, would there be any show in the museum that you would curate?
That's a very interesting question. I think the artist that I come back to kind of time and time again is Rodin. And I know it sounds very obvious, but I would love to see a show where you were able to bring together works by Rodin and Michelangelo. They are obviously two artists that have many, many things in common, and Rodin was hugely influenced by Michelangelo, but I can't think of actually seeing a show that brought their works together. So if I were a curator and I had, everything at my disposal, I think I'd want to do that.
Oh, really nice. And is there anything that you regret, if I may ask, in your career path?
Gosh, that's interesting. I think I would have loved to have done. I would have loved to have done a master's degree. I thought about it. After leaving my undergraduate and doing kind of various internships, I went into Christie's as a graduate intern. And at that point, I was really toying up with, do I try and get a job after the internship finishes, or do I go back and do a master's? And at that point, I decided, no, I'm going to try and stay in the kind of professional world. And part of me would love to have been able to go back into study, just have another year, another couple of years studying. But no, I feel good, no regrets.
And how does the day of managing director of Bonhams look like?
Every day is different, I would say. It's a job that involves lots and lots of different things. So a lot of the time that I'm in the office, I'm talking to specialists, I'm looking at the exhibitions that we've got open on the floor, dealing with kind of pre-auction questions, either from the specialist departments or from clients. And some of the time I'm traveling. So now that I'm managing the European business, I visit Paris very often, travel to the European offices, go and see clients in Europe. So it depends what's happening, but lots of different things. So talking to the specialists, talking to clients. When I'm having a good day is when I'm out seeing somebody's collection. That's definitely the bit that I enjoy the most. And talking about it with the other specialists, what's exciting, what's good, what's unusual about somebody's collection that we're valuing or selling.
And I actually wanted to ask you, because I know that Bonhams acquired a French auction house and a few European auction houses in the prior years. How did it change and shift the dynamic in Bonhams? And also, how did the sort of rise of the European and especially Parisian scene with Basel and Paris and a lot of galleries moving to Paris change Bonhams?
Yeah, I mean, the rise of the European art market, I mean, it was always strong, and somewhere like France has always had a very kind of profound collecting culture. In many ways, a deeper and more historic collecting culture than many other countries. So it feels right that France and Paris in particular have a very strong auction industry and strong commercial galleries. I think the acquisitions that we made in France and in the Nordics, so for example, Cornet de Saint-Cyr was the house that Bonhams acquired in France and Belgium, that really allowed Bonhams to come together with a house that had been, really synonymous with post-war and contemporary art in the French art market. It allowed us to gain access to a great group of specialists, an incredible network of clients and historic valuations that really gave us a huge kind of foot up in a really exciting market. So I think the acquisitions have been incredibly successful, and one of the most exciting things about working at Bonhams over the last kind of decade.
And how was 2024-2025 for Bonhams as years? Was there any particular sale that you would think was the best sale in this years, or?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting couple of years, obviously for the art market at large, but also particularly for Bonhams. We went through this period of, intense growth and expansion. over kind of 2021, 2022, where we reached a kind of point of record sales, acquisitions of the other houses in Europe and America, gave us this kind of huge expansion, and there was a lot of forward momentum, great kind of energy. 24 and 25 have been more challenging. The market conditions have definitely shifted. We are seeing definitely a more cautious approach from consigners. The appetite is there in our area of the market when it comes to buyers. We are, really operating in that kind of 2,000 to 2 million pound bracket for the most of what we do. And that buyer base is still very active. So I feel like we've kind of weathered that slightly tougher market very well. I'd say sales that have stood out for me over the last couple of years, we sold this incredible Mamluk glass mosque lamp in the Islamic and Indian art sale, which I think came in through a client request who really had no idea what the object was. It was, I think, storing flowers in her home. It turned out that it was a known piece that had been exhibited at the end of the 19th century at the Musée Guimet. There were photographs of the work being exhibited there. It had this incredibly illustrious provenance story and went on to sell for over £4 million hammer in the Islamic and Indian sale. So I feel like one of the areas that Bonhams is really exciting with at the moment is that Islamic and Indian art. We've had a number of really incredible results. And also this beautiful Bridget Riley painting that we sold in April of this year for over £1.5 million. That was, I think, a marriage of an artist that I really like. The history of the work and the approach that she had taken with it was particularly kind of interesting to me. She was looking at ancient Egypt and kind of riffing on her experience of looking at ancient art and architecture there, and sold it to a client who absolutely loved the work, and the process itself was exciting.
Wow, I think I remember this painting at the preview that you had. Congratulations with the sales, and I think I read also about the Islamic sale. What are the plans of Bonhams for the upcoming year? Well,
plans for the upcoming year. Well, I think second half of the year is already planned. We plan so many things far in advance. We set our auction calendar for next year around this time. So that's kind of what I've got coming up, is really planning for 2026. What new sales we're going to be doing. Are we going to be doing any particular initiatives to grow? One thing that's new, which I think is quite exciting, is we have hired a business development director in the Middle East. So we are expanding in the UAE, which is obviously a really exciting area of the market, and buyers there are some of the most kind of impactful in the market right now. So that's quite an exciting initiative that I'm working very closely with her and kind of managing that expansion.
oh, that's great. And I wanted to ask you, what are the sales that are coming up in the winter or in the end of the year that one should look out for?
Definitely the Freeze Week sales in London in October in kind of 20th and 21st century. I think we're already seeing really interesting property for those sales. So I would keep an eye on that week. And of course, Classics Week at the end of the year. So we kind of round off the year with our Classics Week. And Winter Classics is always, I think, a sale week that I really look forward to. The best of antiquities, old masters, European ceramics, British glass, a kind of cornucopia of everything, traditional and rare. So yeah, I would say look out for those.
Oh, thank you so much. And I actually wanted to ask you, what do you think of the market in general today, and especially the contemporary art market versus the classical art market today?
The contemporary art market is, I think the market in general is burdened by a lack of positive sentiment for sure. That's a combination of interest rates, which is an issue everywhere for a lot of our buyers. They have a feeling of having less disposable income, less money. There is also less of a kind of free feeling towards borrowing money to reinvest in art or collectibles. So that's kind of impacting some more speculative areas of the market where people would, in prior years have borrowed money to invest in art, knowing that they were likely to make, some money on that investment in a short period of time, particularly in the kind of contemporary field. Also, the geopolitical context, I think, can't be ignored. We've had, a couple of years, 2-3 years of solid conflict, geopolitical tensions, changes in government that has caused hesitancy, people wanting to wait. So I think it's been a difficult period. And auction is, it's such a transparent end of the market that you really see firsthand exactly how that sentiment is playing out in the market. So challenging, but like I said, the kind of core of the market, that £2,000 to £2 million, dollars kind of range, has been the most resilient by a long, long shot. It's really the top end of the market that has been kind of most impacted. The differences between contemporary and classics in terms of the market, hard to say, but I think the unifying thing is really that rarity and absolute quality is the thing that is driving the market in both areas. Something that has been seen very often on the market that is not fresh, that isn't perhaps the best quality, hard to find a buyer at the moment at a price that your vendor might have imagined was possible 3 or 4 years ago. But when something is rare, when it's incredibly beautiful, when it has a great story, the sky is still the limit. There's a lot of people who are still really, really dedicated to collecting what they love. Thank goodness.
That's great. That's really inspiring. I wanted to ask you, but what do you think is more affected by sort of the geopolitics and the situation today? Is it contemporary art or old masters?
I think probably more contemporary art, because it had that slightly more speculative element to the real high of the market. If you think of when people talk about wet painting and kind of ultra contemporary, there was so much uplift in a lot of those artists' markets in a very short space of time. That was, again, driven by people moving money into certain artists' work on the kind of understanding that they were likely to make a good return. Once the kind of geopolitical impact started to be felt, we saw interest rates really rise. That then created a much more kind of dampened feeling, which with old masters, the market is outside of the kind of masterpiece area is quite stable. So I would say more contemporary, you see those fluctuations more readily.
Thank you so much for the insight. And I actually wanted to ask you, what do you think one sort of as an auction house, any enterprise, what one needs to do, or what one enterprise needs to do in order to change it?
To change the market?
Yeah, or to impact.
I think you can change the market. I think what you can do to have a positive impact is really interrogate your pricing as a specialist. So looking at, whether an estimate feels like it's achievable, like it's correct, working very hard to sell the things that you do bring to auction, and making sure you're engaging with your buyers, you're communicating properly about why something is important, why something is of particular quality. I think that is the job that we must do, is when we bring things to market, to make sure that we are presenting them, whether by way of the valuation itself or by way of the marketing and promotion, that we are doing that to the best of our capabilities. Because when things sell well at auction, it's there for everybody to see. Like I said, it's the most transparent form of selling within the art world. So if we do a good job and we sell things well, we're going to help sentiment be more positive. So I think that's really the role that auction houses have to play, and that's what we need to do over the next kind of 12 months, is really work hard, make sure we're doing the best job we can.
That's great. And I actually wanted to ask you, and how do you think, and this is a question I actually quite often ask, can we attract more young people into classics? More young buyers?
Definitely. I think that's the perennial question. I think so many old master dealers or decorative arts specialists are always thinking, where do we engage new buyers into these categories? And there's been a lot written over the last few years about kind of new generation of buyers showing interest in contemporary art as a contrast or something that complements their contemporary collecting. And I think we almost need to, whilst it's good to recognise the fact that a lot of younger collectors will show interest in something like Rembrandt etching because it looks really interesting when juxtaposed with a Peter Doig print or something like that. I think we need to give some younger collectors credit that they may also just be very interested in that category in that period, whether it's the 18th century or 16th century Italy. I think there are still collectors out there who are beginning their journey and they find the idea of owning something from that period really exciting and exceptional. So I think there's loads of scope. It's all about how you engage people, how you talk to people about the art, making it approachable, which perhaps with old masters and the more traditional fine art and decorative arts, it's perhaps less approachable or it's been presented as such compared to contemporary art. But I think, we need to change that.
I see, and which leads me to another question, which might be a bit a tricky one, but still, do you have a favorite department in Bonhams?
Oh my goodness! It's like asking someone, "Do you have a favorite child?"
Yes. Sorry
I
about it.
always find the question, "Do you have a favorite artist?" really difficult because I think when you work in art, you never want to say favorite department. That's so tough. I think it's really hard for me to not say the Impressionist and Modern Art department. I think I've got a good excuse to say that because, once a specialist, always a specialist. So I'm going to have to go with them. But my guilty pleasure, let's say, would probably be scientific instruments, just because you get the most weird and wonderful objects and there's always a good story. But yeah, Impressionist and Modern.
And I actually wanted to ask you, do you collect yourself?
I wouldn't say I collect, but I definitely, when I have the opportunity, like to buy artwork and I like to support artists that I know and whose work I love. But the works that I have in my home are very heavily on the kind of prints and photographs side of things. I think, I love printmaking. I've done printmaking myself as a kind of practice, and I really love it as an art form because it's so technical, so varied. But as a collector with a kind of lowercase c, it allows you to collect the work of artists that would be totally out of reach as an oil painting or even a work on paper. So I find collecting prints is a really good way to really be able to live with an artist's work without spending, untold sums of money. And I just love photography. So those, I think if you, came to my house and looked at my environment, that's what you'd kind of come away with is quite on the modern end of things and a lot of prints and photography.
Oh, that's great. And do you have any other hobbies? Anything you do when you have free time from such an intense days of working in an auction house? And
hobbies, I mean, nothing unusual, I have to say. I'm probably quite boring. I love to do yoga and I love to go walking. So my partner and I will take our daughter and go into the countryside and have just a day in the fresh air and go to the pub. I find that such a nice antidote to the art world and living in central London, which I love. And I love everything that, to be able to do the job that I do is such an honour and a pleasure. So I don't need that much of a kind of escape from it, to be honest. And a lot of the time during my kind of weekends, I end up going to exhibitions anyway. So it's something I really enjoy engaging with. But getting out of the city and getting into the countryside and having like a good walk and a pint of beer at the end is probably quite up there.
Of course, which actually leads me to another question. What are the most enjoyable parts of managing the auction house, and what are the most difficult parts?
Most enjoyable part definitely is when something like the mosque lamp that has an incredible story from being discovered to selling for a lot of money, doing really, really well. That moment when you're either aware of or you're with the family or the owners of an artwork when it completely, overperforms. And it can be life-changing for some people. I think that's really hard to beat. Also, the moment of discovery itself, if you are, as a specialist, researching something, you receive the details of a work, or you go and see something in someone's home and you know immediately, oh my goodness, this is something really special. I think that is so exciting and I think quite addictive. I think people really get addicted to that moment where you think, oh my God, this could be something massive, something really interesting, something really valuable. The hardest parts are probably when the opposite happens, when you have a very tough sale or you have a work that you feel, it happens every once in a while that you have an artwork or an object that you really believe in, that you feel has incredible kind of inherent value, rarity, is very special, but for some reason it doesn't translate on the day and the market goes, not interested. And we've had so many moments where things that really, we believed in so much, when sometimes it just doesn't translate, the appetite's not there in the market, or it doesn't perform as well as you feel that it could have. But I mean, that is, that's the market speaking, and you kind of have to respect that. So it's two sides of the same coin. It can be the kind of greatest moment of triumph, but it can also be quite painful and disappointing when something doesn't meet your own expectations.
And I wanted to ask you, which personal qualities does it take to manage an auction house?
I think positivity. If you are a pessimistic person, I don't think it's a job that would suit you, because every day you get up and you don't know what's going to come in, you don't know how the sales are going to do. There's nothing certain about the process whatsoever. The very nature of an auction, especially a live sale, you could have a buyer on the telephone who is desperate to buy your cover lot, and they get stuck in the plane, or they get a bit of bad news about one of their investment portfolios and they decide they don't want to do it, they don't want to buy it, and you'll have no warning whatsoever. That doesn't suit someone who doesn't kind of get up and go, that's all right, we can live with it, we'll find another buyer, we'll have another auction tomorrow. I think you've got to be positive, you've got to be energetic, because it can be incredibly hectic. And you've got to be curious. I mean, if you're curious and interested in things, it's the best industry in the world, because you're seeing so many different artworks every day. It's, a real pleasure.
And actually, I really wanted to ask you this question myself. I was always really curious. When the head of department or like few specialists come up to you with an idea of a sale for next year, like a superstar sale or like department, more like collection sale that wasn't like like classics or like planned contemporary sale, and they have a whole presentation like a gig for you, and you have like few of those sales. How do you decide?
Normally, that, I have to say, that's usually a real kind of collaboration between the departments and the kind of the people managing the business, because you need the ideas to come from the departments, because they have the best feeling for the market and what people are looking for. But it's really, I think, rather than a kind of, pitching the idea, very often that's the kind of culmination of lots of different conversations. But it's a mixture of things. You want to see a real belief and enthusiasm from the specialists who would be leading it. You want to be able to see that there's market demand for what would be coming for sale, and also that it's telling an interesting story. I think that's really important with any, collection sale or thematic auction or exhibition that you're doing. You want it to be telling an important story about what's happening in the art market or in art history at any kind of given moment.
And if you would have two ideas, two projects from two different departments for the next year, and one is more safe to make and more safe to sell, but it's sort of a bit less, I wouldn't say exciting, but a bit less. And one is a bit more risky, but could be really exciting. Which one?
I'd try and do both. But if you couldn't do both, I think I'd probably be more interested in doing the risky option, because the tried and tested, you've already got your kind of marquee auctions for that kind of material. So I would rather take a risk and see if we can open up a kind of door in the market, see what buyers are out there that we don't know. And I think it's really important to not be worried about failing in the auction business, or at all, to be honest. I think we have to try things, otherwise the art market would look exactly the same as it did, 300 years ago. So it's interesting to kind of try things out, and recognizing that maybe the first or second time that you do a certain kind of project, it might not be a top line success, but if you see things coming from it that are really interesting, I think it's worth pursuing them.
I also wanted to ask you something actually completely different, but still also very, very interesting. Thank you for your amazing answer. By the way, does Bonhams have a favorite art fair?
I would say not really. I think we, as an auction house, we don't necessarily align with any art fair, because we're not exhibiting at any art fairs or working in any official capacity with any. But I would say, Frieze London is obviously, Frieze Masters in particular, I think is quite reflective of a lot of the material that we sell at Bonhams. Maastricht as well, because we still have such a, we have such a kind of deep base of experts and specialists who vet there. So I think, yeah.
And thank you so much, India. And last but not least, I wanted to ask you, what would you tell and what would you suggest for a young person starting out in the art world, in the art business, in the auction house? I know that Bonhams does a lot of programs for the graduates and a lot of internships, and I just wanted to ask you what your suggestions would be.
Yeah, I think it's so different now from when I started in the working in the art market. Firstly, I think it's much more normal for people to change company, change area of the industry much more kind of rapidly now, which I think is really good. It means you gain all these different areas of expertise, different experiences, that when you do kind of settle into a company or a kind of niche within the industry, whether it's gallery, tech, auction, advisory, fairs, I think then you kind of have all these different strings to your bow. So I would say embracing the idea that you can kind of hop around initially and gain that experience in different areas when you're at the beginning of your career, and try and make as many connections as possible. Being someone who wasn't necessarily born into a family where there was a lot of interactions with the commercial art world. There was a lot in the kind of world of art history, but limited exposure to the commercial art world. I would say, looking back, I wish I'd kind of been more proactive about really kind of getting out there and meeting as many people as possible, staying in touch with people, because it's such a small world that the connections that you make and the people that you meet along the road, especially at the beginning of your career when you are kind of moving around a lot more, they can go on to be hugely impactful as you kind of develop in your career. So you know, if you find people that you respond really well to who are kind of mentor figures in your career, keep in touch with them. Nobody minds meeting up for a coffee and just having a catch-up chat with someone. But if you keep that going over the years, you know, they can be some of the most important relationships that you have. So yeah, I would say don't be afraid to move around and gain experience and meet as many people as you can and keep in contact with the people that have kind of mentored you along the way.
Did you have a mentor?
I've had a couple of mentors in my time, and it's, you know, that's such an important role in someone's career, you know, advising without bias and listening to the concerns and giving that kind of feedback that you just can't get from your boss. You know, or your peer in a way. I mean, peers can also be mentors as well. I mean, some of the best advice that I've had in my career has been from my peers, from my friends. But yeah, I've had a couple of mentors, and they've been really meaningful and continue to be.
Thank you so much, India, for such an insight. That was such a pleasure having you today.
Thank you, Daria. No, it was great, and it was lovely to chat to you.
Thank you. And please stay with the Phantom of the Rubens and follow me for more art news. And please do check out more of the Bonhams' amazing auctions that are coming up.
Thank you.